Okay, here's the translation of Block 1 of 5, keeping everything as is, with no summarizing, rewriting or additions, and preserving the format and punctuation. I was there, standing at the supermarket checkout, with the cart overflowing with groceries, when I opened my purse and felt the icy emptiness where my wallet should have been. My hands trembled as I rummaged through every compartment, every pocket, every corner of that black purse I'd been carrying with me for years. Nothing. The line behind me grew. People murmured, the cashier looked at me with a mixture of impatience and embarrassment. That's when I looked through the huge glass window at the front of the store and saw the car, my own car, slowly pulling away from the parking lot. Inside, my son was driving with that knowing smirk, and she, my mother-in-law, was in the passenger seat, turning around, looking directly at me through the glass, and then she laughed. A loud laugh, audible even from there, a guffaw that crossed the distance and hit me like a slap. My son accelerated, and they disappeared around the corner, leaving me there, alone, without money, without transportation, without dignity, with dozens of people watching me, as if I were a beggar, a con artist, someone trying to take advantage. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, feeling my face burn with shame, as stubborn tears insisted on welling up, and I fought with all my might, not to collapse right there, in the middle of all those people. I don't know how long I stood paralyzed in that exact spot, but when I finally managed to move my feet, it was to take a step back, pushing away the cart full of groceries I couldn't pay for. The cashier called the manager, and I tried to explain, my voice coming out shaky and low, almost inaudible. I tried to say it was a misunderstanding, that my son had left with my wallet without realizing that I would come back later. But the words rang hollow even to myself. How could I explain that my own son had abandoned me there on purpose? How could I put into words the cruelty I had just witnessed? The manager, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, just nodded and said it was okay, that I could come back another day. But his look said it all. He didn't believe me. He thought I was just another person trying to pull a fast one, another sad story invented to cheat the system. I left that store with my head down, crossing the hot parking lot under the midday sun, not knowing where to go, not knowing how I would get home. I sat down on a bench at the bus stop in front of the market, and there, finally alone, I allowed the tears to fall. They weren't just tears of shame or anger, they were tears of everything, of all the years I spent raising that boy, of all the sleepless nights when he was little and had a fever, of all the sacrifices I made, all the opportunities I passed up, all the dreams I buried so that he could have the best. Tears for every time I bent over backwards to pay for the private school he wanted, to buy the brand-name sneakers he begged for, to give him the life I never had. And now here I was, abandoned like a dog in the street, like something disposable, as if I were worth nothing. My story with my son has always been complicated, but it wasn't always like this. There was a time when we were inseparable. I was a single mother. His father abandoned us when I was 6 months pregnant, simply disappeared, and never gave us any news again. I was left alone to face everything, the difficult pregnancy, the frightening birth, the endless nights with a baby who wouldn't stop crying. But I loved that boy with every fiber of my being. He was my whole world, my reason for existing. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to make sure he never went without. I was a cleaner in the morning, a cook in the afternoon, and I still took sewing jobs home at night. My hands became calloused, my spine started to ache chronically, my knees gave way prematurely. But I never complained. Everything was for him. When my son was 12 years old, I met my husband. He seemed like a blessing at the time. A man with a good job, stable, who treated me with kindness and accepted my son as if he were his own. I married thinking that we would finally have a complete family, a structure that my boy deserved. In the early years, everything was relatively good. My husband helped with expenses, participated in raising the boy, and I was finally able to reduce my workload to just 1 job. I felt like I was breathing for the first time in more than a decade. But then, 5 years ago, something changed. My mother-in-law, who had always lived in another city, became a widow, and my husband insisted that she come to live with us. I didn't have the courage to object after all. She was his mother. She was alone. She needed support. I thought it would be temporary. But temporary turned into permanent, and little by little, that woman began to invade every corner of my life. At first they were small comments, subtle criticisms about how I cooked, how I kept the house, how I raised my son. She said it was just to help, that she had more experience, that she knew better. But each word was like a pinprick, devaluing everything I did, undermining my confidence. And my husband, he never defended me. He always took her side, saying I was being too sensitive, that she was just an old lady wanting to feel useful. Over time, my mother-in-law began to interfere directly in the relationship between me and my son. She spoiled him excessively, bought him expensive things with the money my husband gave her, always making a point of saying that she knew how to take care of him properly. She began to make poisonous comments in front of him about how I had been a suffering mother, how he went through hardship because of me, completely distorting the narrative of my struggle to transform it into failure. And my son, who was entering adolescence, began to absorb that poison. If you are following this account and identify with stories of overcoming and transformation, be sure to subscribe to the channel to receive more real stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on family relationships. I watched my boy turn into someone else. The sweet boy who used to hug me when he got home became a distant and cold teenager. He began to treat me with contempt, to answer back rudely, to make cruel comparisons between me and my mother-in-law. When I asked him to help me with something around the house, he rolled his eyes and said he was busy. But for her, he did everything willingly, with smiles and kindness. I was slowly being erased from the life of my own son, and no one seemed to notice or care. Or worse, everyone noticed and chose to let it happen. My husband became increasingly absent. He spent more time at work, and when he was at home, he was glued to his mother, talking quietly, making plans that didn't include me. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a maid who wasn't paid, just tolerated. Still, I kept doing everything. I cooked, cleaned, washed, ironed. I took care of them all as I always had, even if I didn't receive a single thank you in return. The situation worsened until, about a year ago, my mother-in-law got sick. Nothing serious, a routine surgery, but she turned it into a Shakespearean drama, and guess who was assigned to take care of her? Me. For 3 months, I was her private nurse. I took meals to her room, helped her bathe, changed dressings, woke up in the middle of the night when she called, all while continuing to work and take care of the house. My body screamed with exhaustion, but I kept going, because that's what I've always done. I kept going, even when no one recognized it, even when she complained that I wasn't doing it right, even when my son looked at me with disdain for disturbing his grandmother with my clumsy care. When she recovered, I didn't receive a single thank you. Instead, she increased the criticism. She said that I had done everything wrong, that anyone else would have taken better care of her, and my son, now 19 years old, agreed with her. That boy I held in my arms, whom I rocked to sleep, whom I protected from all harm, now looked at me as if I were a nuisance. It was in this context that we arrived at that fateful morning at the supermarket. My husband had traveled for work, and I needed to shop for the week. My son offered to take me, which was surprising, since he rarely did anything for me lately. But my mother-in-law decided to go along, saying she needed some fresh air. On the way to the market, she was commenting on everything about how the car was dirty. I had washed it the day before, about how I should have made a better list. I had a detailed list, about how I always complicated simple tasks. When we got to the supermarket, I grabbed my bag and got out of the car. It was only when I got to the checkout, after walking through every aisle filling the cart with everything we needed for the house, that I realized my wallet wasn't there. In that moment of panic, I ran to the window, and that's when I saw it. My wallet was in the back seat of the car, clearly visible, and my son and my mother-in-law were driving away, deliberately abandoning me, knowing exactly what they were doing. Sitting on that bus bench, with the sun burning my skin and the tears drying on my face, I began to understand that this had not been an accident. It had been planned. A calculated humiliation, designed to put me in my place, to show me how small and insignificant I was to them. And the worst of all was that my own son, the boy I raised alone, whom I carried on their backs for so long, had been the perpetrator of that cruelty. When I finally got home, after taking 2 buses and walking 15 minutes under the scorching sun, I found my son and my mother-in-law sitting comfortably in the living room, watching television. They didn't even look at me when I came in. I went to the bedroom and found my wallet on the bed, placed there deliberately so I would know that everything had been intentional. My husband wouldn't be home until the next day, so I was alone to process all of this. I spent that entire night without sleep, sitting in the kitchen in the dark, thinking about everything, about every sacrifice I made, about every time I put others before myself, about how I became invisible in my own life. But something was different that night. Something inside me, that had been dormant for so long, began to awaken. It wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity, a crystal clear clarity about who I was and about what I was allowing to happen to me. The next morning, I went to the bank as soon as it opened. I had an account that no one knew about, a savings account I had kept for years, since before I got married. In it, I had saved every extra penny I could, every amount from extra jobs, every cash gift I received over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, something that belonged only to me. I took it all out and opened a new account at another bank, transferring the money there. Then I went to the school where I worked as a cleaning assistant and asked to speak with the principal. I explained my situation, not all the humiliating details, but enough for her to understand that I needed a change. To my surprise, she said there was an opening for an administrative secretary, a position that paid better and had better hours. She had always noticed my dedication and organization and thought I would be perfect for the position. I accepted right away. I went home that afternoon with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was something akin to hope. For the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself. I was building something that was mine. But the real turning point came 3 days later, when I answered a call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer, looking for Mrs. Helena Martins, me. My heart raced thinking it was some debt or problem, but it was the opposite. My aunt, the only person from my original family who always supported me but whom I lost contact with many years ago, had passed away and left me something in her will. She had no children and always said that I was like a daughter to her. I had drifted away after I got married, at the insistence of my husband, who said that we needed to focus on our nuclear family. Now I understood that it had been another way to isolate me. I went to the lawyer's office the next day, without telling anyone. When he handed me the documents, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My aunt had left me a paid-off apartment in a good neighborhood in the city, as well as a considerable amount of money. It wasn't enough to retire and live off the income, but it was enough to give me freedom, to give me choices, to give me power. During the next 2 weeks, I organized everything in silence. I transferred the ownership of the apartment to my name, changed my documents, prepared my departure. At home, I continued doing everything as I always did, but now it was different. I was no longer trapped. I was just waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a Sunday, during family lunch. My mother-in-law started with her usual criticisms, this time saying that the food was bland and that I would never learn to cook properly. My son laughed and agreed, saying that Grandma cooked much better. My husband, as always, remained silent, just nodding in agreement. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I spoke. My voice came out firm, clear, without tremor. I said that I was moving to my own apartment and that I would separate from my husband. The silence that fell on the table was absolute. My mother-in-law was the first to recover, starting to laugh scornfully, saying that I was crazy, that I had nowhere to go, that I was nothing without them. My husband said that I was being dramatic, that I needed to stop that nonsense. And my son just looked at me with contempt and said that I had always been a difficult person, that he wasn't surprised that I was causing problems. I kept talking, calmly. I explained that I already had a place to live, that I already had a better job, that I had already taken care of all the legal part. I wasn't asking for permission or opinion. I was informing a decision already made. I saw their expression changing from mockery to disbelief, and then to anger. My mother-in-law started screaming, saying that I was an ungrateful woman, that after everything they had done for me, and okay, here's the cultural adaptation of the provided text block for an English-speaking audience. I've made adjustments to names and potential cultural references while keeping the core narrative intact. Block 4 of 5. English adaptation. You were abandoning them. The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. After everything they did for me, who took care of that house, who worked tirelessly, who was humiliated and undervalued for years. But I didn't argue. I simply stood up from the table. My husband, Mark, tried to grab my arm, his voice taking on a threatening tone I'd never heard before. He said I wasn't going anywhere, that everything I had was because of him, that I was a failure without him. I looked directly into his eyes and saw a man who had never truly loved me, who only saw me as someone convenient, someone who took care of his mother and kept his house in order. I pulled his arm away firmly and said that I already had a lawyer, that the divorce papers would be served next week, and that there was no discussion. I started to walk upstairs to get the suitcases I had already packed and hidden in the closet. That's when my son, Ethan, finally stood up and blocked my way. He was trembling. I don't know if from anger or shock. He asked how I could do this, how I could abandon my family. And there, looking at that young man who was my son but had become a stranger, I felt my heart break once again, but I also felt a strength I didn't know I possessed. I told him, my voice finally cracking a little, that I loved him more than anything in this world, but that I couldn't live in a place where I was treated like nothing anymore. I said I would always be his mother, and that my door would always be open to him, but that he needed to respect me if he wanted to be a part of my life. I said he had a choice to make about the kind of man he wanted to be, and that I hoped one day he would understand that true love doesn't come with humiliation and contempt. He didn't move, just stared at me with wide eyes, as if he was seeing a completely different person, and maybe he was, because I was different now. I walked past him, grabbed my suitcases, and walked down the stairs for the last time as a resident of that house. At the door, I turned around one last time. My mother-in-law, Barbara, was yelling obscenities, my husband was red with anger, and my son was standing in the middle of the staircase, still processing everything. I said only one thing, that I wished they could be happy, and that I hoped they would find someone willing to completely obliterate themselves for them, because I wouldn't be that person anymore. I left that house with 2 suitcases, my purse, and a dignity I had lost a long time ago but had finally regained. I called a cab that was already waiting, and went to my new apartment. the first few days were strange. The silence of the apartment was deafening after years in a house full of critical voices and constant demands, but it was a peaceful, liberating silence. I started at my new job and found that I was good at it. Really good, in fact. The manager praised my work, my colleagues respected me, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I had professional value. My husband tried to contact me several times in the first few weeks, alternating between threats and pleas, but my lawyer took care of everything, and I remained firm in my decision. The divorce went through. I didn't ask for anything other than the legal division of the assets that were due to me, because I didn't want anything tying me to that life. My mother-in-law, I later learned, spread terrible stories about me to anyone who would listen. She said I had gone crazy, that I abandoned my son, that I was a selfish and cruel person. But the people who really knew me, my coworkers, the neighbors who had seen me for years being the first to wake up and the last to go to sleep, they knew the truth. My son didn't contact me for months, and each day of silence was a stab in my heart. But I had learned that I couldn't force anyone to value me, not even my own son. All I could do was live my life with dignity and hope that one day he would understand. That day came almost a year later. I received a text message from him asking to talk. My heart almost leapt out of my chest when I read those words. We arranged to meet at a neutral cafe on a Saturday morning. When I saw him walking into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked more mature, more tired too. He sat down across from me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, he started to talk. He said that after I left, the house had become unbearable. My mother-in-law had transferred all her criticism and demands to him. My ex-husband was always in a bad mood, complaining about everything. And for the first time, he began to realize everything I did, everything that kept that house running, everything I endured in silence. He said he started to remember when he was a child, how I was always there for him, all the sacrifices I made, and that he realized too late that he had treated the best person in his life like she was nothing. His eyes filled with tea. Here's the English translation, maintaining the original content, format, and punctuation, followed by a culturally adapted version for an English-speaking audience. Literal translation, he cried when he apologized. They weren't empty or manipulative apologies. They were sincere, painful, loaded with real regret. I took his hand across the table and said I forgave him. I said he would always be my son, and that I loved him unconditionally. But I also said that I needed him to understand that I now had limits, that I had built a life that brought me peace, and that any relationship we had from then on would need to be based on mutual respect. He agreed, and little by little, very slowly, we began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy and it wasn't fast, but it was real. He started visiting me regularly, and in those visits we really talked. He told me about his fears, his regrets, his plans for the future, and I listened to him, not as a doormat, but as a mother who had finally found the balance between loving someone and maintaining her own identity. Today, 2 years after that terrible morning at the supermarket, my life is completely different. I was promoted at work and now coordinate the entire administrative sector of the school. I made true friendships, friends who value me and support me. I started doing things I always wanted but never had time for. Painting classes, walks in the park, guilt-free reading. My apartment is small but it's mine. Every object in it was chosen by me. Every corner reflects who I am. I wake up every morning without that weight in my chest, without that anxiety that someone will criticize everything I do. I sleep peacefully, knowing that I gave my best, but that I no longer need to sacrifice myself until I disappear. My son is building his own life now, but we keep in regular contact. He moved out of his father's and grandmother's house, is sharing an apartment with friends and working. He says he wants to be a better man, different from what he was with me. And I see genuine effort in that. As for my ex-husband and my ex-mother-in-law, I learned that they are still in the same house, trapped in their own toxicities, and I feel sorry for them, genuinely, because they live in a world where control and diminishing others is more important than true love, and that, in the end, is a prison much worse than anything they tried to do to me. That woman abandoned in the supermarket, humiliated and destroyed, no longer exists. She was reborn from the ashes of her own pain and became someone whole, someone with limits, someone who knows her own worth. I learned that we are not obliged to accept crumbs of affection from people who should love us completely. I learned that sacrifice without recognition is not love, it is self-destruction. And I learned that it is never too late to start over, to choose yourself, to become the heroine of your own story, instead of just being the supporting character in the lives of others. I look back and clearly see the moment everything changed. It wasn't when I received the inheritance, it wasn't when I got the new job. It was on that bus bench, under the scorching sun, with the bitter taste of humiliation still in my mouth. It was when I decided that that pain would be the last I would allow to be inflicted on me without reacting. It was when I understood that I deserved more, and that the only person capable of giving me that more was myself. If there is a lesson I carry engraved in my heart, it is this: you can love someone deeply and still choose to love yourself more. You can be generous, dedicated, sacrificed, but never at the cost of your own soul. And when you finally find the courage to stand up for yourself, to say no, to choose your own peace above the convenience of others, you discover a power you never imagined you had. The power to be whole, complete, sufficient, the power to be, finally and truly, free. Culturally adapted version for an English-speaking audience, he cried when he apologized. They weren't hollow or manipulative apologies. They were heartfelt, painful, filled with genuine remorse. I took his hand across the table and said I forgave him. I told him he would always be my son, and that I loved him unconditionally. But I also told him that I needed him to understand I now had boundaries, that I'd built a life that brought me peace, and that any relationship we had moving forward needed to be based on mutual respect. He agreed, and little by little, very slowly, we began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was real. He started visiting me regularly, and during those visits, we really talked. He told me about his fears, his regrets, his plans for the future, and I listened to him, not as a doormat, but as a mother who had finally found the balance between loving someone and maintaining her own identity. Today, 2 years after that awful morning at the grocery store, my life is completely different. I was promoted at work and now manage the entire administrative department at the school. I've made real friends, friends who value and support me. I've started doing things I always wanted to but never had time for. Painting classes, walks in the park, reading without feeling guilty. My apartment is small, but it's mine. Every object in it was chosen by me. Every corner reflects who I am. I wake up every morning without that weight on my chest, without that anxiety that someone will criticize everything I do. I sleep peacefully, knowing that I gave it my all, but that I no longer need to sacrifice myself to the point of disappearing. My son, let's call him Mark, is building his own life now, but we stay in regular contact. He moved out of his father's and grandmother's house, is sharing an apartment with roommates and working. He says he wants to be a better man, different from how he was with me, and I see genuine effort in that. As for my ex-husband David and my ex-mother-in-law Evelyn, I learned that they're still in the same house, trapped in their own toxic patterns, and I feel sorry for them, genuinely, because they live in a world where control and putting others down is more important than true love, and that, in the end, is a prison far worse than anything they tried to do to me. That woman abandoned in the grocery store, humiliated and broken, no longer exists. She was reborn from the ashes of her own pain and became someone whole, someone with boundaries, someone who knows her own worth. I learned that we're not obligated to accept scraps of affection from people who should love us completely. I learned that sacrifice without recognition isn't love, it's self-destruction. And I learned that it's never too late to start over, to choose yourself, to become the hero of your own story instead of just being a supporting character in the lives of others. I look back and clearly see the moment everything changed. It wasn't when I received the inheritance, and it wasn't when I got the new job. It was on that bus bench, under the blazing sun, with the bitter taste of humiliation still in my mouth. It was when I decided that that pain would be the last I would allow anyone to inflict on me without fighting back. It was when I understood that I deserved more, and that the only person capable of giving me that more was myself. If there's one lesson I carry etched in my heart, it's this: you can love someone deeply and still choose to love yourself more. You can be generous, dedicated, and giving, but never at the cost of your own soul. And when you finally find the courage to stand up for yourself, to say no, to choose your own peace over the convenience of others, you discover a power you never imagined you had. The power to be whole, complete, self-sufficient. The power to be, finally and truly, free.